I grew up on a farm. I got to see my dad do a lot of cool things like building and fixing and welding and inventing. He was a pretty clever guy, still is. So I've been really excited about this this is part of why I bought the land, I think. It's just so I'd be able to do something like this. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna go buy a welder. But the point of the shot here is knowing knowing the first welder was coming, I started buying all the stuff I was going to need because there's nothing more irritating than having the welder and not having everything else. So let me just show you a little bit of what you need when you have a welder. First, you got to think protective gear. Then a good part of welding is grinding. You get a grinder. They wear out. And then you realize that when you're grinding, you need to switch back and forth between a cutter and a flat brush and a grinder. And you figure out it's faster if you just get another grinder. You need different gloves. And then you should get some safety glasses, and since you can't see, you get prescriptions. That's just cool. And of course you can't reach, so you need 150 feet of extension cords. Okay, now you're ready to weld. Except you don't have the welder yet, because it doesn't fit on the table. And every welder's got a different color for a different brand name. This one is yellow. It's very yellow. Quite yellow, in fact. Because I'm going to be doing most of my welding outside, flux course is kind of preferred because if the wind blows your shielding gas away, then you have no shielding. Let's see if this works. We are going to hook this to the... Right now I'm running off the inverter. This should be enough to at least feed the wire. I'm hoping to get this thing set up and functional, and then we'll start the generator up. Alright, plugged in. Get that up where I can see it. Switch on. Click. Wire feed to about mid-range. So we should be feeding wire now. Oh yeah. And keep in mind this is electrically active, so I could arc it now. You can feel it coming through. There's the wire. Okay. So now we switch it off so we don't arc ourselves. This should not shock me now. The fact that it's DC doesn't make me feel any better. It's not supposed to shock you at this point. That would suck. Just finger tight. Put the cover on. This is just basically a splatter shield at this point. Okay, and then we're going to trim it about 1/4 inch. Just like so. And eventually you'll have a huge collection of little short pieces of wire that you can't do anything with. Close this up. To close this, pull the latch down, close it, and then push the latch back up, and then it'll stay closed. And with the 10-pound spool, that ain't bad at all. You can pick that up and walk around. When I was learning to MIG weld, I had one of these with the 10-pound, a different brand, but the same idea, with a 10-pound spool, and I was walking all over the roof, carrying that in one hand, my helmet in the other, and you know, it was just, it was very interesting. Okay, I'm going to stop the camera, I'm going to prep some steel, and then test it out. First test will be with the inverter, just to see if it can handle it. Because man, would that be cool. Okay, for reference, we're still on the inverter. I set voltage at about 6. And wire speed for 5, that's a good starting point. I got about 1/4 inch sticking out of the tip. I ground down a bare spot for my ground. I used a flat brush to take the metal off, so that should give me a good ground. Since all these pieces are welded before they were painted, they should have connectivity between all the different pieces. First test, I'm just going to hit this bare spot right here. That one, that's shiny metal. The reflection kind of makes it weird. Yeah, inverter can't handle it. Not too surprised. I wonder if I turn my voltage all the way down. I just want to test that once. I'm going to turn it down to like 2. Just to see what it does. Because on 2 it should be pulling a lot less amps. It might work. Then the next step will be see if I could do it with a bigger inverter. Okay, here we go. Nope. Almost. Okay. I'm going to turn it down to the lowest setting. It was almost going. Turn my wire again. And the helmet seems to work. Nope, not quite. Nope. Okay, a little new setup, generator going. Yeah, blew a hole right through it. Way too much power, that's a thin gauge. So let's crank this down to 4. I'm going to slow the wire feed down a little bit too. There we go. That's acceptable. Let's do a pretty bead. Another hole. Alright. I'm getting enough shine off of here that the helmet is changing. Another hole. Let's try something thicker. This is building up there. It's not very thick. Yeah, it's working. And the generator sounds like it's doing fine. I'm not having real problems with that. That's comforting. I am not a professional welder. I've never been to welding school. So, save your criticism or share it. That's cool. No worries. I'm not here to teach you how to weld. I am here to say though that I welded with a guy that was pretty good, had a lot of experience, and by the end of the week I felt like I had a grasp of things. Now what I don't have is the engineering side of welding, like making proper choices and so on. Okay, so this is just a little plastic wire brush. It looks like a toothbrush. Okay. Anyway, so I was down in Belize on essentially a mission project, and Yeah, that's not terrible. And you know, by the end of the first week, I kind of felt like I knew what I was doing. And a couple weeks after that, the guy that taught me left, and a week after that, I was teaching the locals how to weld. So it's not super difficult. And the engineering on that project was taken care of for us. Somebody else spec'd out the metals and everything like that. All right, that would definitely work. What you're doing when you're welding, you get the puddle started, and then you're doing kind of a C pattern. Obviously better than that, but that's the idea. So you're going back and forth, and the process is you're melting the metal, the wire is filling in the gap for you, and as it cools down, the two metals are fused together, so you're mixing it back and forth to get liquid metal on both sides, and you're kind of drawing them back and forth. And then when it cools, it becomes one piece. And if it's done correctly, this weld is stronger than the metal around it. So if you did a stress test and broke it, it would tend to break out here, not on the weld, if you did a good job. So there you go. Grinder's kind of noisy, but hey, you know, whatever. Okay, first impressions. Looks like I had penetration. I only see one little hole here and one on the outside. But the middle looks good, so I'm going to polish it with the flat brush. Because this is just about screwing off anyway, so. And this is why I have two grinders. So I got the red one with the flat brush, and this one with the grinding. And later on I'll have one or two of these with cutoff wheels, because it takes a while to change the wheel. It's not horrible, it's just annoying. So if you can have a grinder set up for a purpose and just use that, just grab it and use it and put it down, and then you're done. That's beautiful. I don't care. And I love being able to switch back and forth. I like that. Alright, let's go for the close-up here. Big money shot. Focus. Perfect. Yeah, this is what I got. Is this hot? Not too bad. A little one up here by my finger. A little dot there. Bigger dot there. So I didn't have perfect penetration, but when you grind it and then polish it, these pieces weren't perfectly aligned, so you can kind of feel it. But if you painted that, that would nearly appear that it was one piece of metal, right? So if you were going for a nice finish, you could do that. In production, you never do it. I mean, like if you look over here, obviously they didn't spend any time at all grinding that. That's just welded, probably wire brush, straight to paint. Okay. So you're not going to spend a lot of time doing this usually, unless you're showing off. By grinding it smooth like that, you're probably reducing the strength. But the weld, really the important part of the weld is where it's right between the two faces. And you know, with only a couple of exceptions there on my first real pass. Perfect. Should focus. Okay, typical controls. Most MIGs you'd have 2 dials, sometimes 3. Wire feed, that's how fast the wire shoots out of the end of the gun. In MIG welding, flux core, any of the wire feed welding, you are burning the wire. The wire is, well, dissolving, melting into the weld. So as you're welding, that wire is constantly being dissolved or melted, and it helps to fill in the gap between the two pieces. So you need to control how fast the wire comes out, and that is variable depending on a bunch of different things. One of the things that is varied on, though, is based on the voltage. If you're welding a very thin piece, like the part that we kept making holes in, you would want to turn this voltage all the way down so that you don't create so much heat. Then you could fuse the two thin pieces together. If you're taking something really thick, like armor plating, you crank this all the way the other way, and then you can melt a big glob of metal all at one time. So it's a little bit of just kind of getting started and set up, and you're like, okay, test it on a piece of scrap that's similar to what you're welding. How does it feel? If you get done an inch of welding and you stop and you look down and you can't see the wire, you got to turn the wire speed up a little bit. What'll happen is the wire will melt inside the end of the nozzle, and then you got to take the thing apart, and usually you throw the nozzle away and get a new one. That's why I had a 10-pack of nozzles. The opposite is if you're done and you see an inch of wire sticking out, or you can actually feel the wire hitting the metal and pushing your hand away, slow the wire down. So that's kind of it. Is, if you got somebody that knows how to weld with you, they can tell you the same kind of stuff, and it's just get in there and screw around with it. It's not, you're not likely to get shocked unless you're in the rain. You'll get burns occasionally, but if you wear your gloves, they're minimal. If you've never done anything with tools, yeah, this could be a little bit intimidating and potentially dangerous, but normal shop practices, which if you've never worked with tools, that won't mean anything to you, but safety, wear your gloves, wear your eye protection. If you're welding, you should protect your bare skin. Don't weld in shorts and flip-flops. You see a lot of people doing it. The arc itself releases infrared and ultraviolet, which you can get a sunburn from welding. Okay, so it's just like a tanning bed. It's creating ultraviolet light that you will, if I weld a lot and if I'm not wearing proper gloves and long sleeves, by the end of the day your skin feels tight, and you'll notice that your arms are a lot darker than they should be. And I don't typically burn, but you do feel this sun exposure. And the other half of welding really is the prep work. Pulling the trigger, making the arc, that's all glamorous, but the prep work is key. Clean up the metal, do your grinding, make proper cuts, make nice straight cuts. Put the pieces together, use clamps. Magnetic clamps are wonderful. That helps you get things aligned and keep them aligned. Now, the amount of heat that's created when you're welding, you're melting metal, okay? And this is something that's not intuitive until you do it for a while, or unless you happen to have people telling you about it. You heat up something hot enough and then cool it down again, it's going to warp. So if you got a bunch of nice straight pieces and all your cuts are good, and you weld the first one completely, and then you go to the next one and you weld it completely, and you go to the next one and you weld it completely, by the time you're done, this thing will be so out of alignment because the heating and cooling, expanding and contracting cycle, the whole thing will pull out of alignment. It'll be very demoralizing. You'll be like, what in the heck is going on? Because it was beautifully done. You did a really good job cutting it, and it looks like it was thrown together by a drunken hack. And so what happens is, what you do is you use little tacks, and not like thumbtacks. You weld a little tiny bit, just a fraction of a second, just enough to fuse it. It's kind of like using hot glue and a little bit of glue here and there. Get the whole thing tacked together so that it's just held just by the smallest amount of a weld. And that's good for two things. It doesn't create enough heat to warp anything. It kind of lets you get things fused together into position. Then you go back and double check all your measurements, make sure everything is still square. If it's not square, you can fairly easily break a tack. You might be able to just grab it by hand and snap it off. You're not welding it to make it really strong. You're just kind of tacking it together is the idea. So you can break it and reposition it a little bit if it's pulled out. Then what you do a little bit of a weld on each point, and you go around 2 or 3 times, and that'll keep it from warping because you don't put enough heat in any one spot to pull it out of alignment. All right, and experience is one of those great teachers for this kind of thing, because you'll think you're doing good, and then you look back and you realize, holy cow, it just really badly warped and it's not usable. So then you got to go back and play around with it a little bit. What's wrong? What's it doing? Once you're set up on a specific job, and this is one of the things that I remembered from working on the roof, if you're welding the same kind of material over and over and over, you're not going to mess with these very much. Once you get them set, you pretty much leave them. It is handy though to once in a while look at the numbers and kind of remember, okay, I'm set on about 3 and 3 right now. Okay. Why would you think about that if you're not going to change it? Well, what happens is you pick up the welder and you move it, and one of your loose cables whacks one of these things, and all of a sudden you're on 4 instead of 3. Your next weld, you blow a hole in the metal, and you're like, what the heck is going on? Okay. Look back, oh, it's on 4, it should be on 3. And 3 is just arbitrary. 3 is whatever works, right? On this specific job that I just finished welding, you know, this screwing around, it's not a job, I thought 3 was about right. Actually, it was building up a little bit too much on that last part that I polished, so I could have gone up to maybe 4. Anyway, just be aware of the fact that there isn't really any friction on these. They're continuously adjustable on this welder. Some welders are click adjustable. If you enjoy the process, this is one of the coolest things ever. If you don't enjoy the process, this is really miserable. It's hot, it's dirty, you're going to burn yourself. You know, you're in the sun, just like today, wearing a black hood over your head and big old winter looking gloves. You know, if you're not having fun, it's awful. It really is. I don't know anybody who would want to do this, you know, but since I grew up watching my dad welding and just the process of taking a pile of metal and making something useful out of it, I think that's the coolest thing ever. The key takeaway from today for me, doesn't work on the inverter, but I think a really big inverter could work. But then what would be the point, because you drain your battery so fast? Okay. Does work. This welder does work, at least on the thinner stuff, on a 4,000 watt generator.